would you say to a friend who, after you had described a situation that had just happened and why you were so upset and everything that had been going on, paused, looked at you and said, when are you going to stop being a victim of life? Welcome to another episode of Coming to Your Senses. My name's Jules Wyman and I am your host, and I'd love to share with you that moment because that's exactly what happened to me more than 20 years ago now. I just described a big story about what had happened that evening in the pub to my friend as we were walking back to another friend's house. And that's exactly the question that she asked me with true honesty. When are you going to stop being a victim of life? Now, as Dr. Sharon says in the fantastic TV show Ted Lasso, the truth will set you free, but at first it will piss you off. And that question, when are you going to stop being a victim of life, undeniably pissed me off. I can't remember for certain, but I think it was quite a few days before I actually spoke to my friend properly. And I think I just pretended that the question had never been asked and ignored it. But basically, with very often these kinds of questions, and it's one of the reasons I started the podcast, is because it was a seed that was planted, and very often that becomes like this. It's a bit like, it's more like a pebble in the shoe, really, rather than just a seed. And it just niggles, it just irritates enough to keep getting your attention. And when a statement like that, when are you going to stop being a victim to life? When it gets your attention, it's really hard to move away from it. You can move away from it and you can ignore it, as I did for a number of years. But it doesn't fully go away, or at least it didn't for me. Now, I am going to be talking about the impact that victimhood has. I'm only going to be able to speak to it from my perspective, because I'm only going to be speaking for the years that I've spent being in victimhood, and also what I notice with the wonderful people that I get to work with in my coaching practice. And the reason I'm caveating it in that way is because if I'd have listened to this myself and heard somebody talking about it, I probably would have been like, well, you don't know my story. And you're absolutely right. I don't. But what I do know is the patterns that I start to see and the habits that I notice for many of us, far too many of us, that get cultivated. And ultimately, I think that one question, when are you going to stop being a victim of life, was a slap around the face. Not literally. And my friend, we've spoken about it since. It was one of those questions from her perspective. It was just a genuine question, and she hadn't meant it to have as much of an impact, a profound impact that it did. And even though I was really pissed off, and even though I found it very difficult to even know where to start with looking at what she'd said, it was that plant of a seed, that pebble in the shoe, that got me thinking and got me starting to realize that I wanted to live my life differently. Now, it took me a number of years to be able to even know where to start at that point, but nonetheless, I did. And I think that why I'm recording this episode of Coming to Your Senses about victimhood today is because I have noticed a prominence in victimhood language starting to come to the surface, very much in workshops with the delegates, with clients one-on-one that are in some really tough situations. I'm not negating the situation that they're in, but it goes to episode, I wrote it down, 16, I think it is, yes, the sexiest word. And that so many of us, the sexiest word, if you haven't listened to episode 16, but I highly recommend you do, is actually responsibility. And I think that when we are caught in victimhood, there's a lot of, it's not my fault, I can't do anything about it, this is who I am, that's just the way that life is, this is just the situation. There's a lot of resignation in a defeatist manner. And I get it. I absolutely get it. I spent far too many of my years in that place, and I'm still kind of shaking off the shackles of that to truly see the amount of times that victim thinking will surface, and therefore then the impact that it can have on my life. And the kind of impact that it can have, what I've begun to realize for myself is that being a true victim, I would spend a huge amount of my time really in fight or flight. So I would either be in high defensive mode, or I would be in fear. Now, many people from the outside world wouldn't have noticed that, because I'd become, I think one of the terms that's often used these days in relation to neurodiversity is masking. And I think that I was fairly capable of masking those high levels of fear. I think I was less clever at masking the defensiveness, because that was extremely overt. But both of them were rooted in a high level of insecurity. And that insecurity was on a number of different levels. It wasn't just, I thought that it was just about the way that I looked, and had so many issues about the way that I looked and my body shape. And the list was endless. I could do a whole episode. I've kind of spoken about it in a few. But it was also about so many other things. I had a chip on my shoulder about coming from a council estate in the UK, and what that meant. I also had a lot of issues around perceptions around the insecurities of my education level, that I did and didn't have, grades that I got, the books that I hadn't read. There was a lot of that went on. If you've listened to the first episode of Coming to Your Senses, you'll know that in the early 2000s, I experienced a breakdown. I tried different therapies, but it was coaching that truly helped me transform my life. Initially, when I discovered coaching, though, I couldn't afford it. And it was a kind soul who sponsored me not only to have coaching, but also to train and become a coach. And my promise to them was that I would pay it forward. And I've done that in many ways over the years, initially through social media and private Facebook group called Confidence Revolution, and also through Coming to Your Senses, the podcast. But it triggered for me a passion to really want to make and create a secure, supportive space for people to be able to come together and have conversations that transform their lives. So I created the Conscious Conversations community. It's a group where we meet on more than once a month, and we have a focused theme which is guided by the community and facilitated by me. There's hundreds of hours of learning and resources and materials to help you transform your life in a like-minded space. Because I get passionate about it, and because this was my promise to pay it forward, I'm offering you the opportunity to trial it for £1 for the first month. If that appeals to you, then head to juleswyman.online/conscious conversations offer. juleswyman.online/conscious conversations offer to explore what's available for you through being part of a conscious community. So my insecurities, it was kind of easy to trigger them. And for those that wanted to, they kind of played that game, and I got very angry and upset. And how dare they do that to me? They were the ones that were making me feel a certain way. It was them that made me feel angry. It was that situation that made me feel insecure, or it was those people that were making me feel the way that I was feeling, however I was feeling. And the situation that sparked the comment that my friend made, when are you going to stop being a victim of life, was we were in a pub, and some guys were just being very drunk and leery and wouldn't leave me alone. They were a good 20 feet away, but they were making comments and shouting and doing various things, and the pub landlord sorted it out. But my thinking hung on to it, because it was a story then that fed the victim narrative of, why is this always happened to me? It's not fair. It's not my fault. And then a few years ago, I heard a phrase, and I apologize, I can't say who I originally heard it from, and I've subsequently heard it from a number of people. So now I'm a bit confused as to who I heard it from originally. So I can't cite it to whoever I heard state it originally. But the phrase that I heard was, it may not be my fault, but it is my responsibility. And that phrase really came to mind for me when recently I was asked by a delegate in a workshop as to whether it's her responsibility to stop her binge eating. And my question, if it had been the right environment to ask it, which it wasn't, would have wanted to dive a bit deeper as to how it wasn't her responsibility. Now, I personally think that the way that so many people have got addicted to ultra-processed food is actually not our fault. Because if you read Dr. Chris Van Talken's book, Ultra-Processed People, the addictive ingredients are in there that have happened over many, many years that we've not been aware of, and therefore we've become addicted to. So it's not our fault that the body has become addicted to it, but it is our responsibility to then do something about it. Again, there's that sexy word coming up again, because responsibility is about having the ability to do something about a situation, making a choice for yourself. So the situation that had happened in the pub, I had the opportunity. It wasn't my fault that those guys were shouting what they were shouting and, being drunk and doing what they were doing. But I had the ability to go and speak to the landlord and ask him to do something about it. I didn't. I think I moaned to my friends around me and they went and did it. And then I continued the story on the way home, which is why the comment of, when you're going to stop being a victim of your life. And really and truly what I'm seeing over and over again is that when we get caught in victimhood, we're denying that we have any ability to change or influence a situation or make a different choice for ourselves. And it keeps us in that insecure state, which is very much that fight or flight. And I think that that's where then we can kind of get caught in this vicious circle going round and round of, I'm insecure, and so therefore I'll attempt to cover it up with whatever defense mechanisms or running away mechanisms or anger mechanisms that I can use, which then doesn't allow us to actually move away from that victim story. It actually just feeds the insecurities. It's like there are the two sides of the same coin. Things started to change for me when I began to challenge. Firstly, it was when I realized how much fear there was. And I just started to challenge for myself. I separated out the difference between physical fear, when my life is genuinely in danger, and psychological fear, when it wasn't genuinely in danger. It was just my thinking was describing it in that way. And then challenging that psychological fear, whether there was any validity, whether there was any truth within there, whether I could do anything about it, what choice I wanted to make, basically asking a bunch of questions that challenged that story that was well established. And not just believing the thinking because it was there, but challenging it to see whether there was any validity within it at all. I was teaching this with one of my clients, and we were going through a particular situation. And she was playing around with this as an idea of just challenge the thinking. Don't automatically believe it, just challenge it. And very much like I was decades ago, had been caught in this victim story, which for her was coming out in a psychological fear. So she started to challenge it. And what she noticed is the more she challenged it, very lovingly, very kindly, and walked toward that fear, it dissipated. It might bring up another story, but once she challenged that one, it would then dissipate, and then it would try and out another one. And she said each time she challenged it, it got weaker and weaker, to the point that when it came up, she just wasn't interested in it anymore, and just wasn't interested in it anymore. It kind of had no power. And that's what we need to start doing if we want to move away from that victim story and actually recognize, I cannot change the global situation. I cannot change the international situation. I cannot change the European situation. I cannot change what's going on in the UK. I cannot change what's going on in the city that I live in. But I do have influence, and I do have choice as to what it is that I want to do. I can make a choice for me. So, for example, if a client changes an appointment, very much when I started out my coaching practice 19 years ago, that would have been caught into, well, why they don't respect coaching, they don't think I'm any good. And look, basically, insecurities would have started kicking off. Whereas now I recognize that that's just life. Things happen, things change. For example, had a podcast recording booked in today, and the guests, unfortunately, are ill. No, nothing anyone can do about it. They're gutted, I'm gutted. We can't do anything about it. So therefore, we just reschedule it. It's really not an issue. But if we get caught up in those stories of yeah, but and la 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 la, then ultimately we're going to keep feeding that insecurity. And without us realizing so often, because the thinking is translating the world, it's making up an interpretation, it's interpreting the world through the lens very often of a question, what does this mean about me? Well, if I've got the preconceived idea that the world is happening to me, then that's the lens I'm going to be answering that question through, which is just going to feed that circle again. Feed more insecurities, trigger more anger and defense and fight in any other way. And that's just hard work. It's really hard work. What I notice with clients is that when we challenge what's going on for them and looking at where it is that they want to go, and that might be specific goals that they're looking to achieve, or it may be that they truly want to transform how they're interacting with life, family, work, business, whatever it may be. But what I notice, and the word that's come up so often, especially in the last 2 months, is I just feel freer, lighter, and life seems easier. They're the words that get used: freedom, lighter, and easier, the 3 words that get used very frequently. And I think so much of that is because what we're not aware of is how heavy and how much energy maintaining a victim story takes. We've become so used to it as that background noise. We've become so used to the habits of what we do, whether that's reaching out for substances, whether that's doing other habits because, that's just what we do to cover up our insecurities, whether that's putting on such a brave face that no one would ever know and it's become this performance, but behind the scenes we're terrified that someone's going to find out. And it takes a lot of energy, so much energy. I know, I've been there. That's why I shared in the very first episode around I chose life. When I'd reached the point of wanting to leave the planet, I chose life. Even though I didn't know how to live differently, I knew I wanted to live. In fact, actually, little side note here, it was the same friend in that first episode in the tent. If you haven't listened, then need to go back and listen. That it was that called me out about being a victim. I'm very grateful that she's still a friend in my life. And what I find fascinating is that when we don't have to immediately know how to stop our insecurities or how to change them or how to stop being a victim and actually take responsibility for our life. All we need to do is just make the choice that we want to. I want to do this differently. I wonder how I can. I wonder what would be the way for me to do X, Y, or Z. I've got some very big life questions hovering around in my mind at the moment. I've just had a 4-hour drive back to York today. And what I noticed for myself is there were 2 big life questions that were just percolating around in my head. I don't know the answers to them. But the more I can let them percolate, rather than the why haven't I got them, is, what would it be like to have those? And is that really what I would like? And what do I think it's going to give me? And how could I get it? And what if I had it? What would my life be like? All of those kinds of questions enable me to start playing around with it. And then I can look at with, okay, so what have I got the power to influence? What abilities have I got to make a difference? How do I want to respond to those situations? That then puts the power back in my hands. But the more I shrug my shoulders and go, well, it's not my fault because, my background or how the weather is or how the UK is at the moment, or because of my age or because of my marital status, financial situation, whatever the victim story is that keeps me stuck, repeating the same habits, repeating the same behaviors, and getting to the point, where it's October 2024 as I'm recording this. So we're coming into the last few months of 2024. And so often we can then start another year without really going, okay, what could I do differently? Not just about setting goals, but actually really transforming our lives, transforming it away from being a victim into, as one of my clients often says, being a victor. Victor or victim, that's always my choice, is his phrase. And it is our choice. We often don't think it is. Circumstances happen, but how I respond to that is down to me. Now, sometimes there will be an automatic reaction to something, but the moment I have awareness, the moment I pause and go, that happened, what do I want to do from there? That's when I've got a choice. That's when I can start to do, behave, challenge, and change things. The moment I notice either defensiveness or fighting, anger, insecurities appearing, if nothing else, even if I don't know what would be a far more resourceful thing to do in that moment, I simply start to take some deep breaths. That in and of itself, as it's become a stalwart of my practice over the last 15, 20 years, that's going to make a shift. And that shift means that I will then be able to access different information to then make a different choice. And even if that's not immediately the answer, it will give me a different choice, which will then ultimately lead me onto a different path. It's not easy being called out as a victim, but if I'm not taking responsibility for my life, then I am thinking that life is happening to me rather than with me or for me. As one of my clients always says, life's always happening for me. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do, is start to notice for yourself. Do you think that life is happening to you? And therefore, what's going on? How is that? How's that showing up? What's the impact that's having for you? Or is life happening with you? Are you choosing with whatever shows up? Or is life actually in your favor? Rather than being paranoid, you can be recognizing that life's out to give you, it's not out to get you. It may throw you a challenge or two, but those challenges are there for you to grow, there for you to wake up and see what's really going on. It's those moments of shaking you to go, look, this is what's happening and this what could be possible. Here's an opportunity. And here is an opportunity. Here's an opportunity for you to do things differently. It's an opportunity for you to make a different choice without judgment, without beating yourself up, and seeing where that could lead you to. So just like my client says, you have the choice, victim or victor. Which one are you going to choose? I look forward to speaking to you again on another episode of Coming to Your Senses.